Welcome to another Ready, Set, Apply interview job. Today we're going to look at one called Security Analyst for Threat Intelligence. And if you don't recall, I'm doing this series because a friend of mine is currently applying for different jobs in the cybersecurity industry, everything from SOC to threat intelligence. Actually, I have a couple friends that are in there. And as we've gone through different parts of the job listings and what's in the job descriptions, there was a big ask by several people for me to share what we covered and what we knew. And so that's what I'm doing here today. And again, we're going to cover Security Analyst for Threat Intelligence. Now, this particular job listing is for a fairly good-sized company, though I've obscured their name just to allow them to maintain privacy. In this case, they've got a decent amount of job responsibilities and duties laid out and a few not too bad education experience breakdowns. Let's go through it, though, step by step. One of the first things I want to say is this is a very typical, to me, job listing. And part of the reason I find it typical is I can see in here where, just kind of as a norm, if you're not familiar with job listings, they are not a pleasant experience to create. Most people don't sit down at their desk today, take a sip of coffee, exhale with a deep breath and go, yep, I want to write me a job description today. No, typically it's done on the fly, ad hoc, and someone's like, who else has written something like this, and how can I kind of use that as a model or template? And so what you find is there's a lot of artifact turnover where pieces or sometimes full all-out parts of a job listing or job description kind of get pulled into one, and then it goes through a process of typically a couple of hands before it finally shows up in front of you, the person trying to apply to it. And the reason that's important is some of the bullets that get entered in there under job responsibilities and duties or education experience, sometimes they don't make sense. And other times it's like you're looking at someone who has to do 4 different jobs. And you might get a sense of that as we go through that. I do believe you can see a few artifacts if you look hard enough where this obviously came from pieces and parts from a couple of different other descriptions I would submit. But it doesn't really matter. We're going to talk to them all anyway. They're all very good things to talk about in the context of a security analyst for threat intelligence. So let's jump right into it here. I'm going to use their first statement here on responsibilities. And what they say right off the bat is you're going to be, I might as well use the larger text from here, responsible for monitoring the tactics of criminal and geopolitical entities, and which target, of course, the company, their assets and infrastructure. So what does that really mean? Well, you need to know the field. You need to be able to speak to and go into detail about major cyber actors that target this particular enterprise or this field. So if this was drawing one out of a hat, manufacturing or communications or industry of some kind, you need to know who the major players are on the criminal and, say, nation state side that might focus on your particular enterprise. And knowing that ahead of time, especially going into the interview, will be very helpful, because then you can bring up and show you and demonstrate your knowledge of their problems by making references, say, to a couple of actors that they know for sure are in their target set, that they're in the criminal's target set, make sure that's clear. And also go through and show that you know the enemy's strategies and tactics. Know the difference between those, please. Actors and the actor profiles, tools, malware, favorites, everything. So if you say this is nation state, be ready to talk to their strategy, what their goals are, what they're trying to do, how they're implementing those, and then get down towards the nitty-gritty of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they're going to run with, as well as what tools they like to use, their malware. If you can do a thumbnail sketch right there in the interview, it's a quick way to show a win and show and demonstrate your knowledge that they're looking for. Because if you can rattle it off, then you're demonstrating that you have a deep bench of information in the back of your brain. And that's critical when you're trying to talk to and demonstrate knowledge, and especially in a threat intelligence position. Something this also means is this keyword right here that I bolded. The word monitoring is special, especially in our industry. That means you're going to use tools typically, or use processes to pay attention to something on a regular cadence. So you're going to keep updates going, and you're going to have cyclic understanding of what's going on there. That's a really fancy way of saying you're going to observe things such as reports. So when McAfee or Symantec or Palo Alto or Dell or whoever issues a intelligence report, you're going to pay attention to that. You may have that as a feed coming from an API or some other source. You may have other tools such as an anomaly or something really heavy that pulls in information and categorizes it for you. I kind of started into my next bullet here. You might be part of an ISAL or an ISAC, which are basically sharing groups, or you may use commercial products such as ZeroFox or Anomaly and so on. All these products and all these groups try to do is to get relevant and key information that's contextual to you in front of you in the smallest window possible, so you can pay attention to the things you need to, but still dig deeper if you wanted to. Same thing for here. Another part of this, especially if you're going to look at geopolitical entities or look at heavier criminal groups, you're going to need something that lets you get insight into all aspects of the internet, both clearnet and darknet. And so you're going to need, if they have it, a service like Flashpoint or Dark Owl or SpyCloud or even Cumry to track assets, actors, and activities. And feel free in the interview, and I highly encourage you to bring these things up and ask them about those services. Usually there's a few points where there's a dialogue and then you jump right into it. Dig into that. If they don't bring things up like that, you dig into it. Demonstrate your experience and understanding of what's necessary by doing that. And that's why it's critical to do so. Now, another point that they had that's part of this second sentence here, provide timely assessments of likely attacks and outcomes. This is you taking what you know from the environment and putting it on a risk management framework. And this marriage of the two will be critical. It's a very powerful action that we do in threat intelligence, and it's become trendier out there, and there's more tools to help support that. But really, that is marrying the knowledge you have in your head and on paper and in your TIP, your threat intelligence platform, to risk management problems, so that you can figure out what you should pay attention to and when you should pay attention to it. This is both helpful and hurtful, and you might be able to go into those case studies and ask them questions about it. And I encourage that. In this case, you might say, look, do you have a top 3 or top 10 set of threats that you pay attention to? You're already giving them hints that you understand there's risk management involved, because you can't watch the world successfully. Not at least at an enterprise level, let me put it that way. So by indicating that you understand that and then going through and asking for examples or even doing a thumbnail example with them, you're showing that you understand how risk management matches intelligence data, intelligence knowledge. And typically, you would hope if they're a decent sized enterprise, they do have a top 3. That should be the things that their CISO or equivalent rattles off every time he or she says, when I look at our environment and I look at decisions that need to be made to buy assets or services or whatever, or to decide whether we should make, segment our network or not segment our network or micro segment our network, or those bigger questions, they should be driven by this idea that there are risks out there that we have evaluated and have determined. And so in our risk management scheme, we know who our top threats are and what they present as. That's where the threat data and threat knowledge comes into. We know they come in and do X. We know that they target us regularly. And so if their most common strategy is to try to reach through social engineering to get an entry port to do account takeover, once to employ that tactic of account takeover, the malware tools and procedures they use in their social engineering effort are things that you might want to take advantage of defensively, so that you can prevent, mitigate, or just completely destroy their capability to succeed. That's why these two become very important. I can't harp on those enough. The other part here is to help identify and predict upcoming attacks and activity. Being predictive with intelligence is very important. The earlier you can predict something, the earlier you can give a warning, shall we say, and predict upcoming activity, the better it is for your enterprise, because again, you can take pre-steps that might just completely kill it before it gets a field, or at least shut it down when it does show up. So be ready to dig into those. And if those are unfamiliar topics to you, dig into them before you get into the interview, so that when they come up, you have an ability to actually outline and talk about them. Be comfortable speaking, shall we say, on those topics. This is another part, and we're still in this first paragraph here. Provide mitigation recommendations and pertinent complex data sets. Now, this is a relatively newish ask that has grown in the last couple of years in the threat intelligence industry, and I love it, because you shouldn't just be a repository of information and be regurgitating and educating at the best, what you know. You should also be saying, look, based on my knowledge and input from other teams and understanding of our environment, here are suggestions and recommendations. You should always be driving that education piece to your leaders upwards and to other people lateral to you. And they also, on that topic, kind of stepping away from it just a little bit here, you see this pertinent complex data sets. I have to admit, I'm scratching my head here, but typically that's an understanding that you're going to not only do recommendations and demonstrate your understanding, but also put that in a form, in a data set form that could be shared and passed over to, say, threat hunting or the SOC or incident response. And you'll see in their other bullets as we go through them, that's kind of what they're hinting at. That is a part that is nicely connected across all the bullets in the different areas they've defined. And this last bullet helps support that with this idea of assist with threat hunting. Really, that's helping threat hunting outline hypothesis of actions like we think that, and you go defend it kind of activity. So you might think that phishing has successfully got in and no one's reported it. To support that hypothesis, you could outline then things you would do from a threat hunting perspective to go see if that's true. You might say that our travelers, we have, say, a small group of people that float around and travel regularly, therefore they have a laptop that's both bound to and then unbound to our network as they move around. Those same laptops may connect to customer networks and coffee shops and other things because these people are remote and they travel. Therefore, they become a higher level risk. Say they bubble up into your top 10 on your risk matrix of things to watch for, and therefore they may be something that you would outline a hypothesis to the threat team to say, because of their position and because of the fact that they're so promiscuous in the networks that they interact with, they have a greater chance of being infection points to get into our network. Therefore, maybe forcing them to go to a singular gateway to log in or putting a greater watch on their VPN access might be a smart thing, but equally your threat hunting hypothesis, just to get to the point, might be that they are an infection point. Therefore, let's go figure out if that is true. How would we do that? You might look at the EDR tools and stuff that's on that particular laptop. You might look at the VPN traffic and so on. You would provide those details or at least assist the threat the threat hunting activity. Better stop before I dig myself into a deeper hole on that one. It's fun to talk about these. I cannot help it. So if you have questions, please ask them in the comments. They are highly appreciated. I don't have to hyperlink these, but I feel like doing so. So I'm definitely going to do it. So well, shucks, get back over here. Hit the wrong button, folks. So if that went off the screen, I do apologize. So what I'm talking about, I wanted to make sure there's links, and these links will be in the description, so you won't have to kind of rapidly scratch these down or take a screenshot. They'll be down in the description. Just open it up and take a look. And you can follow these as much as you want. There's a few book recommendations I'm going to give as well that cover the majority of these points in one or two books. So you won't see a lot, but some of them are pretty key things that if you haven't read, please put them in your library as an idea, or please take them as an idea to put in your library because they're excellent books. Again, as always, try to get the least expensive. If you do get the least expensive version, free or by Kindle or something of that nature, whatever's convenient for you to read is the best version, frankly. But these are the services I was rattling off: Dark Owl, Anomaly, SpyCloud, Team Cymru, Flashpoint, and then ZeroFox. And these are just examples, but they're good ones that you could pull out of your hat and talk about it during the interview. And here, I find that this is somehow part of missing in a lot of people's their intelligence education, I guess. I'm trying to be nice about this. So I always recommend that you review this if you don't actually currently do it. And Fair Institute has a nice breakdown of 3 blogs that really talk about how threat intelligence fits within risk management. It's a little more risk management heavy than I'd like, but it does give a fair approximation of what occurs there. And if you don't have background there, at least gives you some understanding with some snippets and snapshots that you could talk to. All right, so take a second to dig into those, and let's get into the actual job responsibilities and duties. Now, I took a little bit of liberty here, and I reorganized a bit. Because as you look through these bullets, there's, a little more than 12 or so. What you'll find is they really can be organized into a couple different categories. So there were 2 bullets that really talked about reporting, and so I clustered them together. There's a few that talked about monitoring and so on. So as we go through this, you'll see that I've kind of reorganized them so they will not occur in the order that you see here on the left. All right, so reporting was 2 bullets out of that dozen or so, which is about right. So 5th to 6th of your time, if somehow could use that as a proper proportion of time that you would spend. And there's a couple important things in here. Create reports based on different intelligence topics on an ad hoc and regular basis as requested from management. You'll see here they kind of forgot the word regular, but really that's not outside the normal here, right? The normal rhythm is that you create reports on a fairly regular basis, and you report about the threats you see and the problems that arise from them. Nothing different there. Expect like a top 3, top 10, or top 5, a landscape report, or some kind of activity report, whatever it might be on the risk management stage. And ad hoc reports would be basically a response to real-time events or actions happening in the environment. Typically, in my experience, that's response to phishing, malware, travelers, adjustments to the network, taking things offline, putting things online, a breach, and a third party. It's those kind of reportings that you might expect there. And the other bullet here is create detailed intelligence reports that outlines potential likelihood and impact. Again, we're getting back to threat intelligence and risk management. See those previous notes, read those blogs if you're not familiar with it. If you are, pull on your experience and demonstrate it right here. I put a couple links down here for just a couple of the more common products that get created. These are not the end-all be-all, nor am I saying that you should map things like this. Really, they're just examples for you to grab onto, and if you need to talk to how to do this or what it looks like, this gives you at least a model that you could have in front of you or have at least read through a few times so that you've incorporated into your thinking if it's not something you do regularly. So it's always good to have those examples. All right, as I mentioned, I clustered things, so let's get into monitoring here. They had a couple bullets on monitoring in one theme or another. That first one there was monitor external threats. Again, that's kind of the regular cadence of things, but that's mostly a pointer to using tools, ones that I mentioned earlier, and probably other tools that are very specific to the company. But this is also where you get into analysis and predictive work, like where the attackers are right now, the ones that focus on this company, where they're at the moment, where they are in the future, what they're planning to do. Those kind of things would be elements that you would do here when you talk about monitoring external threats. So this is everything from reading reports to actually doing an analytical framework and analysis on utilizing an analytical framework, or performing an analytical analysis. Well, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? Performing analysis on information that you've received in like context to past events and things of that nature. I can stumble over words all day long, but that's the fun of these, right? The other part here is monitoring the dark web and other sources, right? They're like all source intelligence, which is a dirty word. If you came out of the Army or you had anything to do with military intelligence, that's a dirty word to most people there, but it's a good term. They're basically saying look at clearnet, darknet, and zeronet and other sources, and then look for breaches and compromises of their company, preferably in data. And then of course your last one there is monitor and report on large nation state and APTs. I guess they don't understand what that means, but that's okay. APT is another dirty word to me because it's used so poorly. But really, they're asking you to be able to monitor and report on different events and different actors and do some predictive intelligence work. I gave you a couple of links here. If you aren't familiar with predictive intelligence frameworks and some of the works that go into it, these are two good examples that you could grab and talk to in the interview, and then tell them that you only have topical level understanding and that you would need to do more research if that's a focus of your job. That's really a great way to approach that, frankly. Tell them a little bit, expand on as much as you can, and tell them you'd love to learn more if they give you that opportunity. The normal internet, though, and then I'll talk Darknet for a second here. Normal internet, flat out, if you don't have an API that's ingesting reports that you can incorporate and use, then get Feedly, or do both. Feedly is very easy, very simple. You can use a free version or you can do a paid version. It doesn't really matter. It allows you to cluster all your reports and blogs and things like that. Anything that basically pushes out an RSS feed is something you can put in Feedly and keep track of these things and quickly run through and pay attention to only things you need to. And you can also get any of the plethora of keyword monitoring or watch sites out there to look at websites for changes. There's a million of those, so just pick one that works for you. That's basically the sense of it there. And then on the dark web's monitoring, it's best to do this in an outsourced fashion, especially for any sizable kind of company. Though you could spend all your day, trolling Tor and trolling ZeroNet and other locations, absolutely. But this is something better left to a Dark Owl, Flashpoint, SpyCloud, etc. Those kind of companies who have automated and made that a very efficient, effective process to search and dig through things that only you care about without worrying about what you're exposed to at the same time. So, there's some benefits to paying the cost for those services, and maybe you can bring that up in the interview if need be as a discussion point to, again, demonstrate your understanding and usage of those. If you are going to do it manually, if they tell you that we only do it manually, then talk about watching on leak websites. Most of them are Tor, though a couple are clearnet. They just don't tend to stay up when they're clearnet. Talk about those and pay attention to them and say these are the key sites that you would pay attention to, or you would look at most of them, and there's 20 to 25 of these at the moment at this point in time in March 2021. If you're going to do it manually, put a watch on those. It's pretty straightforward on how to keep an eye on those. You can subscribe to a service. There's a few of those that actually publish, with a kind of like a daily digest of all of them, or you can do it manually yourself. It doesn't take long to parse through them. And then maybe focus on key sites that traffic in data. There's a bunch of these both on Tor and on clearnet that basically just move data around and buy and sell it as a transaction. And you could talk to each one of those. If you're not familiar with those, then don't go too deep in the weeds there, because you could get lost. And that's never a good thing. The other part, and I kind of labeled this one as collection and tools, because really these 3 bullets are develop, and identify and use. So they're really, to me, signals that they're talking about you understanding how to code and how to utilize tools to make information happen. And to make information happen, you need to understand your intelligence lifecycle and how intelligence is created, where it comes from, how it's parsed and processed, and then the analysis you run on it, the reporting phase, and then of course getting feedback and so forth, and reassessing, constantly going through this cycle. Know that cycle, be able to rattle it off. Talk about your tradecraft. If you're not familiar with the word, look it up. Those are your skills you use as part of threat intelligence to help them understand that you know what you're doing and you're not just poking buttons on tools. You know your analytical frameworks, you know when you use what, you know how to evaluate and how to match things up to risk management, how to look at it and create predictions, you know how to do trending. Those are all parts of your tradecraft, and you should know them and be able to speak to them. If they don't ask, you should inject it if it looks appropriate. Talk about if you have experience with a tip or a SIEM, and if they don't bring it up, maybe you should ask them as a opening question. When they say, do you have any questions for us? Be like, yes, what kind of SIEM do you use? What kind of tip do you have? Because them not being able to answer that will tell you how mature their own process is in-house. If they don't have a threat intelligence platform, a tip, ask them where they store their threat data at. How do they keep it safe? Where do they put their more dangerous threat data that hasn't been cleaned yet and made safe to move into, say, a more corporate environment? How does that interact with their SIEM? You can ask intelligent questions that help drive this. Same thing for the other one. So back here on collection tools, they want you to identify and use collection tools to support reporting. That's a fancy way of saying, hey, what do you think? What's your opinion on a tool that we should use? Do we use scripting to run a framework to do web crawling, or do we use Scapy to dig out PCAPs, or is there some kind of tool that we can do that integrates well with our system right now? There's lots of questions that can go down this road and be appropriate for that particular bullet. And also, it tells you they may have an interest in consistent improvement, and you should ask about it, because it also could be an indication that they just pasted that in from another job description, and that's no fun. That's not good. That's not relevant if that's the case. And so this is a way to kind of probe and find out. And the last bullet's all about development. Development is usually a synonym for coding to me. And that may indicate they have code in place and they're looking for someone to maintain it or make it better. So when it comes down to it, my coding and examples there, a lot of times I grab 2 things really quickly when that comes down. If I don't throw out my own scripts, be Python, Ruby, JavaScript, or whatever, I'll bring up efficiency tools like Juypter and CyberChef, because they use code, or they use some of the elements and tradecraft of cybersecurity and threat intelligence, and they're easy to grab and demonstrate with. Juypter, have one open and ready, show a couple of processes and efficiencies you use there, and it also allows you to demonstrate coding. With CyberChef, you can pull it open and actually break apart so many different things, or combine different things, and demonstrate your understanding of everything from encryption to how algorithms work. So it's a wonderful tool if you haven't played with it, and something you can easily demonstrate with, which can be a deciding factor in a lot of interviews. And lastly, they had a couple bullets about SOC support, effectively. The 3 of them. We mentioned there's about 12 bullets, so a quarter of them were all about SOC support, so that's a good hint. This is why I said it's almost like 3 different jobs. So you had some threat intelligence pieces in there, you had some monitoring pieces, which are more engineering focused, it sounded like, and some code development, and then here's SOC support. But really, they want recommendations. So in this case, that bullet there is a big hint that they're looking for you to give enrichment to indicators that the SOC is seeing. So you can expect a ticketing system there of some kind, where they're issuing a ticket and they're asking for like enrichment on IP, or enrichment on an indicator, or on a behavioral pattern, or something they saw, be it from phishing or to purported malware or just strangeness on one segment over another. It could really vary. They expect SLAs, so those are basically agreements on how long it will take and what it will go into it. The other bullet about providing daily tactics, threats, and procedures to Cybersecurity Operations Center and applicable IOCs, that sounds like daily reporting in a stand-up. Like, hey, every morning I'm going to issue this report. We're going to get together and I'm going to talk about things, or they may give you a ticket and you're going to respond to it and they want you to have that done at a certain time. It's really hard to say because it can mean a couple different things, but expect short, time-sensitive intelligence production activities based on that. How much of that's a proportion of your time? You should ask. Like, on an average day, how much time do I spend doing this task? It's a key question. It's a nice question to ask. And of course, they want you to provide contextual information to support identified incidents. If you have an incident, you're going to be attached to the SOC, of course, and provide incident response capability. That should make sense. Shouldn't be any surprises there. And I've kind of added, down here on incident response, I've added a couple of links and we'll talk about them in a second, but let's dig into education experience. So this is important here, bachelor's degree or, keyword, equivalent experience in combined education. And since they're asking for 2 to 4 years of experience in threat intelligence or the security domain experience in a mission critical environment, that's another key word here that pay attention to, or I should say key set of words. Mission critical environment. They're looking to make sure that you worked in a high-paced environment. So being able to meet that question is probably pretty important. 2 to 4 years, doesn't matter where you're on the spectrum, other than it'll probably impact how much you get paid. And then, of course, no understanding experience with current incident response best practices. So flat out, be able to talk about incident response. If you don't know incident response, be ready to address that. Somebody will care about it if there's this many bullets. But know incident response in its phases and talk about how Intel fits in. If you don't have that handy in your head, there's a couple of links here. The Incident Responders Field Guide, it gives you great information. You can read that online. The O'Reilly link there is to one of their chapters that gives a great overview. I have links also to the O'Reilly book, which is a nice one that digs much, much deeper if you have time to read before the interview. And so the point here is this is a good, for the most part, a really nice job listing that's well set up, that focuses on threat intelligence tasks for a security analyst and has not unrealistic asks involved for what you would be doing. It does read a little bit like you're wearing a couple hats here. So bring that up when you talk about your proportion of time, what a typical work week looks like, and compensation, whether you have to travel. Ask all the important questions, which I'm going to rattle them off real quick. So if it's not clear, you have questions, please post a comment. If you have to travel, how much? Usually that's expressed as a percentage. And if you do travel, how does that impact your pay? It's always important to ask. If you're working remote, is this a persistent remote position or is it only remote because of COVID-19? Always important to ask, definitely. If you're assisting with threat hunting activity or with incident response, do you stay in your team or do you leave and become attached to that team for a period of time? Talk about your daily schedule. Ask about what kind of tools and access you would need. What do you have to handle in a day? Like, what's a typical day look like is kind of where I'm going with this style of question. Like, hey, on my typical day, how do I break up my time? Where would I spend time at? How much time do I spend supporting the SOC? How much time do I spend supporting threat hunting? How much time do I spend doing monitoring, collection, and building tools, those kind of things. Get them to try to break it out for you if you can. And kind of go down the road with a few other items. You don't have to address salary, especially in the first interview, but definitely within the second or third one, it has to be addressed and what that looks like. Ask all the smart questions there for sure. And before somebody posts, yes, I did purposely skip over 3 bullets, actually 4 bullets, because I talked about this one. This is a remote position in a distributed environment, which means you're at home typically. That's why it's important to ask if that's persistent or if it's right now. These other 3 things are kind of nice little HR kind of items that get injected in there, but basically, can you work well with others? Can you write and speak in an intelligent manner? I can't obviously speak intelligently. And can you organize and keep a calendar is what they're asking about. So if I give you deadlines, can you meet them? Those are the basics there. So this is a good one to apply for, especially if you have a few years under your belt and are looking for potentially lateral or upward moves. So hopefully this helped. If you like these, I'll be doing more of these as he continues to go through, him and now a couple other folks I know go through this process. If you have questions on anything I covered, or you have additional information you'd be interested in on any one of these topics, please hit me up in the comments. Otherwise, give me a like, please. Give that a click if you like it, and if you really like what you're seeing and want to see more of these, give me a shout on the channel as a comment, or subscribe so that I can see it and put a comment down below. Appreciate your time. Hope you have a good day.